Venezuela condemns the new U.S. sanctions and threats imposed on the Bolivarian Republic. Argentina prepares to go to the polls for obligatory primary elections. And Jamaica celebrates 62 years of independence from Britain. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Stefania Bravo. This is from Venezuela. Today we begin in Venezuela, where the Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has said that new U.S. sanctions issued in cooperation with the Venezuelan opposition serve as an attempt to sabotage the ongoing talks, which are being mediated by Norway.
They are ambushing, attempting to implode the dialogue process which is being held. President Nicolas Maduro just yesterday ratified, and it is in a communique which was published this morning, that nothing and no one, not 1,000 Trumps, not 500 Boltons, not 400 Pences, not 300 Pompeos or Marco Rubios or Abrams or Guaidos will succeed in getting us to walk away from the dialogue table, which we are attending in good faith, with concrete proposals, in order to achieve a permanent dialogue and political agreements with the Venezuelan opposition to guarantee peace and stability in the country.
Arreaza also stressed the effects of the sanctions on the procurement of medicine and health needs for Venezuelans, calling the supposed protections for medicine under Trump's order a lie.
It says here that the sale and procurement of medicine is protected. That's a lie. Because how do you buy things? If you need a medication and you go to a pharmacy, and let's say it's Barrio Adentro, which gives it to you free of cost, if you go to a pharmacy in the capitalist world to buy a medicine, you have to pay. You either pay with cash or with a credit card, a debit card to pay. Venezuela doesn't have access to those, nor to electronic forms of payment, or to transfers. We are unable to use the financial mechanisms of the international banking system. It's part of the blockade.
The president of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel, was quick to publicly respond to the new aggression, saying that the move comes as the U.S. government acts in a cowardly manner in blocking Venezuelan assets, calling it robbery and brutal cruelty, which we should not allow. Díaz-Canel sends his solidarity to Maduro and the Chavista people. And Venezuela's representative to the United Nations, Samuel Moncada, has also responded to the latest threats and new U.S. sanctions imposed on the Bolivarian Republic, condemning the illegality of Washington's actions at the UN office in New York.
Today, we are sending letters, two letters, one to the Security Council and one to the Secretary General of the UN. In those letters, we ask, first, we relate the series of aggressive and hostile actions of the United States government, particularly President Trump's administration, against Venezuela, and very serious and dangerous in severity and gravity. First, President Trump last Friday threatened Venezuela with a naval blockade and with a quarantine. These extreme, extraordinary actions are established in Article 41 of the UN Charter only if are authorized by the Security Council, only. And they are authorized by the Security Council only if there are threats to peace, breaking of the peace, or a clear case of aggression. We have none of these cases. We have no authorization of the Security Council. We have no evidence of Venezuela breaking the peace or threatening the peace or even attacking anyone. But without these requirements, the United States, without any regard for international law, is threatening with a quarantine and a naval blockade against Venezuela, threatening with fabricating a famine in a Latin American country just for the purpose of imposing its imperial interests.
On Monday, President Donald Trump condemned white supremacy after a number of mass shootings over the weekend left dozens dead. He delivered this speech despite the fact that throughout his presidency, he has often supported white supremacist ideals and has called on his supporters to take action against his detractors. Meanwhile, the government of Mexico has also expressed great concern about the terrorist attack against El Paso's Latino community due to the fact that at least 8 of the victims were Mexican citizens.
After mass shootings in Texas, Ohio, and Chicago during the weekend that killed over 30 people and left 50 injured, President Donald Trump saw himself forced to condemn the violence, as well as the white supremacist, racist hate that motivated one of the shooters.
The shooter in El Paso posted a manifesto online consumed by racist hate. In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister...
Trump added that he will ask the Justice Department to propose legislation which will ensure that those who commit mass murders and hate crimes face the death penalty. He also urged Congress to make tougher laws on the issue of gun control. Nonetheless, it should be noted that the National Rifle Association donated $30 million to Trump for his presidential campaign, as Republican politicians have long been in the pocket of the pro-gun lobby. As such, U.S. citizens have called on the president to find a solution to the issue.
If he comes to El Paso, our community is a loving, caring community, and we definitely will invite him to come in. I mean, it's a lot to deal with as just a person. I can only imagine how he feels as the president that he has to.
8 of the 22 people killed in El Paso were Mexican citizens. For this reason, Trump sent his condolences to the government of Mexico. But Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said his government will ask for the extradition of Patrick Crusius, the 21-year-old white supremacist who was behind the terrorist attack against El Paso's Latino community.
According to the Mexican law, this is a terrorist act. The National Public Prosecutor is formulating a research folder for the crime, and it will be the first investigation of this magnitude in Mexican history. It will investigate terrorism against our people inside the United States territory.
But the issue of gun violence in the U.S. is not limited to recent mass shootings. According to an organization that compiles statistics on gun violence, since the beginning of 2019, 255 mass shootings have been committed, resulting in at least 8,787 murders. However, during his speech, President Donald Trump preferred to blame video games and mental disorders for the violence.
Mental illness and hatred pulls the trigger, not the gun.
Saying that racist hate and mental disorders are the issue, not weapons themselves.
The perils of the internet and social media cannot.
Gun control demonstrations have been taking place in the U.S. as a response to the latest wave of violence. Our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Jorge, has more.
Demonstrations here in Washington facing the Supreme Court requesting tougher laws regarding the control of guns, something that President Trump didn't address in his speech yesterday when he was mentioning the massacres in El Paso and Dayton, Ohio. Also, there is a lot of anger because he announced that he's going to visit El Paso in the day of tomorrow, and during his State of the Union address in February, he was basically criticizing deeply El Paso, saying that was one of the unsafest city in the country with the highest level of criminality, both things totally fake news, and therefore 2 prominent people from El Paso. We're talking about Beto O'Rourke, pre-candidate presidential from the Democratic Party, and also Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, are saying the visit tomorrow of Donald Trump to El Paso is not welcome.
We thank Jorge Gestoso for that report, and after the break, we'll speak to Pedro Briegel about the upcoming primary elections in Argentina. Don't go away. Welcome back. Argentina goes to the polls this Sunday for its obligatory primary elections known as PASO. The vote is seen as a dress rehearsal for the general elections in October. Two main forces are contending for support in what promises to be a highly polarized contest. On the one hand, the current right-wing president of Mauricio Macri is looking for re-election alongside his running mate Miguel Ángel Pichetto. Facing them, the former president Cristina Fernández is running for vice president with Alberto Fernández as the presidential candidate.
We have been measuring the difference between the Fernández ticket and that of Macri Pichetto. There is a marked polarization between these two forces. Together, they account for about 80% of voter intentions, which is no small thing. But there is also a gap between the two, with Fernández on a bit over 40% and Macri's ticket on 34% in the most recent polls.
Joining us live from Buenos Aires is journalist and political commentator Pedro Brieger. He's the director of the Nodal News website. Thank you so much, Pedro, for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Can you explain to our viewers who might not be familiar with Argentinian politics the significance of the PASO elections?
Well, as you said, it's a mandatory election. It was thought at the first moment to try to find a solution to the parties who choose one candidate with a finger, as they did usually in Mexico. So at the beginning, they thought that this would encourage the different candidates to be in a kind of primary, as you can see it in the U.S., in the big parties, but at the end, both parties here, or most of the parties here, don't have different candidates. So they really they are not choosing for a presidential candidate, but they have different options for different places. But many people are questioning this kind of mandatory election because it just give us the moment of what is happening now in Argentina towards the real elections in October 27th.
The government of President Mauricio Macri has faced countless protests, especially over its economic policies. Do you think it has enough legitimacy to win now and even in October?
Well, if you pick up the indicators of economic and social performance, you will see that most of them, or we could say all of them, has worsened. So it's much more difficult for most of the Argentinians to live right now. But as you know, Peronism is a very important factor in Argentinian history, and many people hate Peronism. So when they pick up a president, they don't think only at the economic indicators. They think also about the history of what it means to be a Peronist. And this has a big influence in Argentina, and it has always a big influence in the elections. You had for many years two big parties, the Peronist parties and the Radical Party, a social democratic party. In some way, in some extent, you can say it was a social democratic party, but now it is with Mauricio Macri, that appeared as a third option in the last elections, and not just as a social democratic option, but as a rightist option. Nowadays, you have two big coalitions. From one side, the Peronist and center-left movements who support Alberto Fernández, and from the other side, you could say that you have all the rightist parties, some of the social democratic parties who supported the Radical Party for many years, and this is the most important thing, many people who hate Peronism and think that they would choose anything besides Peronism.
Now, what are the prospects for a comeback by Cristina Fernández and the Frente de Todos Alliance with Alberto Fernández as the presidential candidate?
Well, most of the indicators right now say that, or the surveys say that Alberto Fernández is quite ahead of Mauricio Macri. But as you know, there is a war between the different surveys you can find nowadays. Many people who support Alberto Fernandez think they will lead these elections for more than 10 points. And in the government, they are trying to say that the difference is not so big as 2 or 3 points. The impression that we have nowadays in Argentina is that if in the PASO Alberto Fernandez leads for a big difference, we could say for 10 points, you can say that the October election would be easy for Alberto Fernandez. But as you know, we have ahead 3 months, and in politics, it's not enough to win this kind of big survey in Argentina, because in 3 months, many things could happen. But people who support Alberto Fernandez and people who support President Macri agree in some way that a big difference for Alberto Fernandez right now would indicate a similar result for October.
Now, Pedro, lastly, there have been a lot of complaints about the counting system proposed for these primaries by President Mauricio Macri. Could this undermine the validity of the vote on Sunday?
It's difficult to answer this question. You have to know a lot of technical issues that I really don't know enough. So I couldn't speak about that, but it is true that the Peronist movement nowadays is questioning the way the government is handling this election next Sunday.
Pedro, we thank you so much for your time for Telesur English.
You're welcome, as always.
Thank you. We have been speaking with Pedro Viegar. He is a journalist and the director of the Nodal News website. Moving on, Bolivia is celebrating its 194 years of independence from Spanish rule, a date in which authorities hope to highlight the nation's economic growth and the strength of its people.
Bolivians are paying tribute to their heroic founders who, 119 years ago, made independence possible.
You need to be blind to not recognize all of your achievements. Our infrastructure, our education, and health.
Social movements are the base of popular support for the government, and they agree with President Evo Morales that they are an integral part of the country's administration, and that after a decade of economic stability, industrialization can finally begin.
We've inaugurated a liquid separation plant. We are producing urea, and we are thinking on starting production of petrochemicals and lithium. We have to diversify our mining industry. We are making progress. You can see it on our roads and our education.
The government has announced that economic success based on the nationalization of strategic resources, such as hydrocarbons, created stability. This is the success of the so-called Bolivian model, which has been highlighted by international bodies.
The United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean recommends adopting Bolivia's political strategies, although they don't have to be implemented exactly. But these strategies will help other nations to diversify and grow their internal market.
The Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean has anticipated that this will be the 5th year Bolivia will lead the region's economic growth again.
We have a controlled inflation. We have a stable currency exchange that allows an economic liquidity. And the fiscal deficit is not due to the increase of current expenses, but is a result of the increase of the state's investment.
During the 194 years of independence, Bolivia has finally seen its first indigenous president, in a country where half the population considers themselves to be indigenous. Meanwhile, official data shows that during this last government, poverty has been reduced by half, and the GDP grew 4 times.
President Evo Morales spoke about the importance of the date for all Bolivians at an event in the city of Trinity, and highlighted the indigenous struggle against the Spanish crown.
We are the heirs of the tireless fight of the ancestral people who resisted with courage, patience, and humility against the Spanish colonialism. They had imposed an exclusion system for the indigenous and exploited our natural resources. Today, brothers and sisters, in the name of our people, I pay homage to those indigenous people who came before us and fought for the independence of country. Tomás Dazo, Nicolás Catari, Tupac Katari, Bartolina Sisa, Gloria Pasay, and all the brothers and sisters that gave their lives for this country.
Still to come, the BDS movement calls for an end to Israeli imports in the occupied West Bank. Stay with us. Welcome back. On August 6, Jamaica celebrates its Independence Day. The island gained independence from British rule on this day in 1962. Prime Minister Andrew Holmes addressed the nation earlier on Tuesday, touting the many achievements of the past decades, while also keeping an eye on the issues that still need to be resolved.
Many positive things are happening in Jamaica right now. There is much to celebrate on our 57th birthday. There is no question that at long last, Jamaicans can feel proud that we're using our political independence to secure our economic independence. However, I want you to know that I'm under no illusion that all is well. Notwithstanding the great performance of the government, there is no room for complacency. There is still much work to be done and pressing issues to be resolved.
Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta has arrived in Jamaica as the special guest for the 57th independence celebrations. His visit will also provide an opportunity to strengthen bilateral relations between Jamaica and Kenya, focusing on the development of an economical strategic partnership by fostering trade and investment. The Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda health ministers have met to find ways of controlling the Ebola virus. Rwandan Minister of Health Diane Gashumba and Pierre Kangudia of DRC met at a border city of Rwanda to evaluate strategic plans aimed at combating Ebola. The meeting was confirmed in response to the rapid spread of the Ebola virus in the eastern DRC city of Goma. Protesters in Malawi have blocked roads with burning tires, calling on the chairperson of the Electoral Commission to resign. Protesters accuse the chairperson of helping rig the country's latest elections to keep Peter Mutharika as president.
Our message is the same, that Jane Ansah must resign. She messed up an election and will continue to do demonstrations for as long as she doesn't step down. And any efforts to stop people from demonstrating are really against the constitutional rights of the people.
If this woman thinks rightly, she will realize that it's high time she resigned. All this is happening because she messed up the elections. We cannot, as a country, suffer because of just one person. The elections were messed up.
Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir has entered a second day of a communication blackout. On Monday, India cut off all major services to deter protests after it annulled the region's semi-autonomous status. A ban on public gatherings of more than 4 people is also being enforced as armed police patrol the city.
At this time, my wife does not have medicines. I need to get medicine, but there are not medical facilities open. This keeps on happening, but there should be some facilities. If people are not well, where will they go?
At least they should have informed us if they wanted to implement any rules or regulations. At least they should have thought before. How could anyone arrange for necessities and commodities?
In Palestine, demonstrators gathered at the Al-Fir checkpoint to protest against Israeli goods imported to the West Bank. The protest is part of the global boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. This comes in response to the human rights abuses the Zionist state has committed against the Palestinian people.
Our message today is part of the boycott campaign of Israeli goods in response to Israel's occupation, persecution, and non-compliance with international agreements. We are working on 3 matters. Firstly, to convince Palestinian citizens not to buy Israeli products. Secondly, to work on improving national production. Thirdly, to convince Palestinian agents who import Israeli goods to stop doing so.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.